Nevertheless, America resisted the influence of Europe for a long time. It had never fought a religious war along the lines of the European 30-Year War. It had not fought any secular wars on its shores as Europe did during the World War I and World War II. America rescued Europe twice from those two self-annihilating wars. The only civil war America fought in its soil was to free some of its citizens from the bondage of slavery. America waged a deadly war against its own people when someone in the South said that the black man has no soul, cannot be saved, and has to remain perpetually a slave to the white man. Americans protested again when the Jim Crow laws, equal but separate, and KKK, Ku Klux Klan, tried to continue the white supremacy despite the civil rights movements. While Europe was wallowing in the mockery of atheism, America was sending Christian missions to the Third World. Today, when the Vatican and other European countries turn their collective backs to God and recognize the state of Palestine as a valid entity, America continues to support Israel. God bless Israel and bless America. Sadly, the traitor Obama determined not to leave office unless he stabs Israel in the back by backing the infamous UN's resolution which condemns the construction of new Jewish settlements on their God-given land. He even empowered Iran, which vowed to wipe Israel from the world map. Nonetheless, the enemy of God has not given up on getting America to abandon Israel. He is also pushes worth all his might for America to turn its back to God. In June 26, 2015, the devil succeeded in causing the American Supreme Court to legalize the same-sex marriage. David Reagan writes, "Today our nation's Supreme Court decided that it is the supreme being. It spit on God's word and endorsed the abominable, an immoral concept that the definition of marriage can be expanded to include a union between two people of the same sex. The God of this universe is the one who created and defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman, and no one has the authority to change that definition." Matthew 19, 4-5. Further, God's word makes it crystal clear that homosexuality is an abomination in God's sight and its practice is sufficient to preclude one from the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians 6, 9-11. And the first chapter of the book of Romans states that a society's acceptance of homosexuality is a sign that it is under the judgment of God and is begging for destruction. Romans 1, 18-27, David Reagan, Lamb and Lion Ministries. Immanuel Kant brought an end to Western philosophy by arguing that human reason was not equipped to perceive anything beyond the physical world. He reduced man to an empirical sensory being whose mind could function only in space and time. He rejected all emotional, spiritual, and psychological human experiences and considered them just byproducts of a human physical brain. Hegel stressed that Kant was correct, but only half right. He said man has within him sense of morality, heroic notion, and great mythological ideas. He said those are part of our spirits or souls. Hegel came during the Romantic period. Man reacted against the cold rationalism, empiricism, agnosticism, deism, and nihilism of the philosophers and came up with Romanticism. Romanticism is defined as a reaction against the Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution, and scientific rationalization of nature. People express their revulsion through visual arts, music, and literature. This shows us that man cannot inherently remain coldly rational because he has emotions, passions, morals, and sense of heroism in him. Hegel rejected the transcendental God of the Bible who created nature, but he believed that God is the spirit of nature itself. He said further that if you want to see his work in nature you have to study history. Through history God reveals himself. In every generation man would come to conclusion of what is right and that would be a thesis. The next generation would come with a different interpretation of what is right and that would be antithesis. The third generation would compromise and reconcile both thesis and antithesis in what he called synthesis. The synthesis of the third generation would be a new thesis which it would produce antithesis on the next generation and the cycle would go on. Hegel saw history evolving and hence he applied Darwinism in history. According to him, man evolves mentally and spiritually. Karl Marx thought that his was the ultimate thesis of human history and came up with his communism. He saw himself as a kind of final prophet of Western philosophy. He was like Prophet Muhammad, who claimed to be the final prophet of God, and everyone after him would be a false prophet. Anyone rejects him is to be killed. Those who espoused the philosophy of Marxism acted like Muhammad and killed those who refused to submit to them: Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao Zedong. Hitler felt he was going to bring the ultimate utopia of history through his Nazism. Nietzsche reacted to the Hegelian notion of the spirit of nature. He felt that Hegel had resurrected the Christian idea of God. He said, "We have found the Bible to be a myth, and we have found philosophically no one could know the truth. We also know that the universe evolves and there is no God. Let us stop using Semitic words such as God, love, and mercy. We are within nature and our minds are controlled by natural laws just like the animals. There is no right and wrong. If we have to find meaning in nature, we need to assert ourselves like the animals. We have to practice the law of nature, might makes right. The stronger lives on and evolves and the weaker dies off. Man is the king of the beast." Then, he said, the greatest wickedness ever done to the Western society are the Jews and Christians, who are holding us back by their antiquated, outdated ideas of deity and right and wrong. He said Christians are exalting poverty and loving the poor. To make the society better, let the poor die and then we become stronger society. Nature, according to him, never honors the weak, but it destroys the weak. If we follow the law of nature, our society would become great society. He believed the greatest notion that did injustice to man, the animal, was the notion of mercy. We should let the weak and poor die. Nietzsche came up with what is known as eugenics. According to eugenics, some people have stronger and better genes than others. Then, he said, we need to practice eugenics in society. We need to get rid of the poor, the weak, and the physically disabled. Recently, the Princeton professor, Peter Singer, calls for the killing disabled infants under Obamacare. Nietzsche proposed that the cultures which more advanced needs to move on and destroy the cultures that less advanced. He believed the two cultures that we should get rid of are the Jews and blacks. Nietzsche was highly racial and highly genocidal toward the weak. Adolf Hitler gave the writings of Nietzsche to Benito Mussolini as a gift. Hitler put into practice what Nietzsche proposed. Many tyrants were influenced by the teachings of Nietzsche. Adolf Hitler, he gassed 6 million Jews and caused the death of 55 million people during World War II. Benito Mussolini caused the death of millions. Joseph Stalin killed 20 million Russians. Chairman Mao killed millions, and until today no one knows how many he murdered. New research has estimated that Mao Zedong killed 48 millions, Idi Amin killed over 1 million and ate human flesh. The communist Khmer Rouge regime and the killing fields at Cambodia. Pol Pot, through the killing fields, he put to death half of the population of Cambodia, and the list goes on. Before them, early Muslim invaders killed 60 million Christians and 80 million Hindus, and the source of both ideologies is the same one: Satan, the devil. Islam caused the deaths of approximately 272 million Muslims and non-Muslims. No ideology or religion ever came even closer to half of the number of deaths, destructions, debris, enslavements, and rapes that Islam did to humanity and continues to do today in our DNA time. Nietzsche's nihilism was the end of the rationalism of Descartes. He got rid of Hegel's pantheism or mysticism. He taught the greatest virtue of man, the beast, is terror. If he is living today, Nietzsche would be a terrorist in the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS. Science was seen as good because it kept on progressing and producing testable results. Science was started on the Christian worldview. Man could stand out of nature and study it and come up with results. It started by Bible-believing Christians such as Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton. None of them rejected the Bible or stopped believing in God after he made his discovery. Unfortunately, science was commandeered by the secular philosophers and thinkers of the Enlightenment. It was wedded with the Darwinian theory of evolution, which rejected the creation of God. Today, evolution is supported by the so-called Big Bang theory. Both theories rejected the creation of the universe by God. According to the Big Bang theory, the whole universe came out of nothing. What a silly idea to believe that, one day out of the blue nothing exploded and created everything. Then, after billions of years, a huge cosmic dust created the galaxies, stars, and planets. The stars kept forming and dying, and their remains produced all the chemical elements that needed to produce life. First, the elements produced molten rocks. Secondly, after billions of years, those molten rocks cooled down and produced chemical soup. Out of that chemical soup appeared the first life. That life found someone to marry, and both replicated themselves. They produced their kinds with specific DNA. They continued to reproduce until new species evolved out of them and replicated its kind, and so on. From nothing to everything, from cosmic dust to rock, to soup, from soup to a life, from one single life to millions, from millions to billions different species, to mammals, to apes, to human beings, to favored races, to super races, etc. From that nothing came trillions of stars. According to the modern astronomy, for every individual human being on Earth there are 11 billion stars. What a stupid idea to believe that nothing produced a small tiny dot. We are told that that dot as small as the dot at the end of this sentence. Such a tiny dot, for reason only knows to them, suddenly exploded, Big Bang, and produced huge dust. The dust created sparks which formed trillions of stars, and those stars formed billions of galaxies. The distance between one star and the other is estimated in hundreds of light years. 1 light year is 9 trillion kilometers or 6 trillion miles. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, is estimated to contain 200 to 400 billion stars and 100 billion planets. Andromeda Galaxy is the nearest galaxy to our Milky Way. It contains 1 trillion stars. The star Alpha Centauri is located in our galaxy, and it is the nearest star to our Sun. It is estimated to be 25 trillion miles away from our Earth. At a maximum speed of about 17,600 miles per hour, about 28,300 kilometers per hour, it would have taken a space shuttle about 165,000 years to reach Alpha Centauri. If we pause and ask, how those trillions of galaxies, stars, and planets are sustained on the space, the astronomers will tell us they are sustained by dark matter and dark energy. If we ask what are dark matter and dark energy, we will be told they are invisible substances and no one has ever seen them. Then why do you believe in something you don't see and you don't want to believe in God? I personally believe the dark energy and dark matter are the power and grace of God who holds everything together. Then, the advocates of Big Bang will tell us the stars produced large rocks which became the building materials for the planets. Those large rocks somehow collided and cemented themselves into huge planets. Out of those trillion stars only one became our solar system and produced 8 planets. Out of the 8 planets, 1 planet somehow created water, oxygen, and all other elements needed for existence, and on until a rock became chemical soup, and that soup cooled off and produced life. And this is how man the animal finds his way out of that cosmic mess. The philosophers of the 20th century define man as a cosmic dust and bubbles of nothing into the sea of emptiness. Until today, evolution is not proven. Fossils records showed the static species of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. No one can prove the evolution of mammals into apes and of apes into human beings. Evolution teaches that man evolved out of rock and chemical soup. In spite of this, evolution is taught in schools as a fact. When the evolution of the species was not sustainable, the theory was extended to evolution of the species through equilibrium or jump. In other words, when the evolution could not be found in the recorded fossils, the theory was changed to one species jump to another species. Mammals jump to apes, apes jump to human beings, and human beings will jump to supermen, according to the book of Nietzsche, the Superman. Evolution made secular philosophers and thinkers hijack science and uproot it from its Christian worldview foundation. Someone said evolution made secular man a proven intellectual atheist. Until today no one knows with certainty what is the best form of government. Democracy, 51% of voters decide what is right and who to rule. Fascism, fascia is a Latin word which means a bundle to use it to beat people into submission as did Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, etc. Or communism, removing the upper and lower classes and making all people equal and living in communion society. America adopted democracy because it came from a Christian worldview, while in Europe, fascism and communism are adopted by many countries. The family was seen as behavioristic model where some people with external genitals and some with internal genitals and the little children are beaten and kept under control. Then, the government became the parent and starting taking the children and raising them up. The parents have no absolute rights on their children, but the children belong to the society. Many families had their kids taken away from them and given to others deemed more qualified to raise. For small reasons or sometimes just for rumors of abuse, parents stand to lose their children. Parents, when aged, are no longer cared for by their offspring. They are removed out of their homes and placed in geriatric facilities. It looks like the children are paying their parents back for neglecting them when they were small and sending them to the daycare. Many people find children are coming between them and their comfort, and hence contraception products are flourishing. In America alone, 40 million children are aborted every year. People preserve baby harp seals but abort human babies. People spend a lot of money in raising pets and either intercepting the conception of babies or aborting babies. Modern arts, music, literature are becoming meaningless without believing in the absolutes. Sartre said any point without referring to an absolute point is meaningless. After Nietzsche came Martin Heidegger. He was a German Nazi. Heidegger said that the black cat wasn't there, and Sartre ventured to add that everyone needs to invent his own black cat. Henri Louis Bergson said there is a force moving through nature where the strong survives and the weak die off. We need to seize the force of nature and assert ourselves. Bergson convinced many thinkers that immediate experience and intuition are far more significant than rationalism and science for understanding reality. By the end of the 19th century, many Christians' faith in God and the Bible were seriously damaged. Many factors jointly caused the faith of Christians to be shaken: rationalism, agnosticism, Darwinism, liberalism, the advocates of higher criticism, deism, nihilism, etc. Those theories were in direct conflict to the biblical beliefs in God, creation, the Bible, morality, the concepts of right and wrong, etc. Many Christian denominations began to embrace external secular theories. The Christians who rejected them split from their denominations to go into hiding. Instead of standing their ground and asserting the teachings of the Bible, Christians separated themselves from the society and let secular ideas to take over. Everything was secularized. Many think that secularism means separating religion from the state. That is just half of the picture. Secularism is a system of political or social philosophy that rejects all forms of religious faith and worship. It is the view that public education and other matters of civil policy should be conducted without the introduction of a religious element. Many Christian colleges and universities began to fall for politically correct secular ideas. Martin Heidegger asserted that there is no truth in life, and whatever man thinks is his truth that gives meaning to his life. Man has to assert his life by exercising his will and his right to choose whatever he thinks will give meaning to him. Existentialism: no one knows the truth, or there is nothing called truth, just create your own truth and exist. Existence precedes essence. Man first exists as a pet gorilla, and then he develops appendages called intellect, will, emotions, and other cognitive skills. Those appendages are not divine, but man develops them to protect himself from other species. Man no longer a being created in the image of God, but an ape evolved into higher species. Nihilism was so cold so that Enlightenment thinkers came up with existentialism. The latest production of Western philosophy are the works of the existential philosophers, Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Jaspers, Marcel, Camus, Sartre, and his consort Simone de Beauvoir. In existentialism you be like God and decide what you think it is truth to you. Satan said you shall be like the Most High God. It is clear why existentialism is so attractive to the youth. It produced the kids of the 60s. One existential thinker put a glass of water on his wife's head and tried to shoot it, but he killed his wife instead. One killed his lover because he abused him when he was a child. I think Aisha might have killed Muhammad if he didn't die before she became a grown-up woman. One existential writer wrote his entire book on butcher's papers. Existentialism led to drugs. In the 60s the kids took drugs in the quest for philosophy. Through drugs they hoped come out of themselves and get in touch with nature. Freud took the mind from man. Postmodernism rejects the existence of reason, truth, nations, morality, etc. Freud felt the greatest human being ever existed was Nietzsche. Before Freud, counselors will try to define issues such as ignorance, weakness, peer pressure, sin, and other emotive values. Freud stated that man has id. The id is his desire for lust and desire for physical needs. Man has ego and superego. The superego tries to keep him in check. Superego is imposed on man by his society. There is always conflict between the id, animalistic nature, and the superego, socially imposed standards. Man parades his ego to society, which is likened to an iceberg beneath which all the conflict resides. He then said man doesn't have a mind. He has conscious and subconscious. Man, like the animal, is neither moral nor immoral, but an amoral being. Suppose someone sees a sexually attractive woman and develops sexual desire for her or sees food and desires to have it. His superego restrains him from fulfilling those needs. Those unfulfilled desires will never disappear but will be suppressed and stored in his subconscious. All unfulfilled passions such as lust, anger, love, hate, and desire for food will go to the subconscious and wait for release. Man hides them, but sometimes they come to the surface through dreams, slip of the tongue, while under the influence of alcohol or drugs, etc. Freud holds that man has no mind and only his conscious and subconscious moves and determines his action. In essence, Freud divorced man from his mind, and man finally is reduced to an animal that develops appendages to protect himself from his perceived threats. Harvard University began as a Christian college, with the intention of teaching biblical theology and ethics. Buckling under the influences of the ungodly secularist ideas, it digressed to a secular institution. In those days, you would be expelled from Harvard University if you don't hold to the inerrancy of the Bible, but today you might possibly be kicked out of it for believing in the Bible. When Harvard University fell, Yale University was established to replace it and teach Christian theology. Then, Yale University was secularized and it was replaced by Princeton University. When Princeton University became secular, Texas Theological Seminary was founded to teach biblical ethics and theology. Many theological seminaries became empty. Students are no longer interested in studying theology. The youth are abandoning the churches. Many churches in Europe were shut down and sold in auction only to be bought by Muslims and converted into mosques. The Enlightenment of Descartes, Kant, Rousseau, and Voltaire led to Darwinism, no creation, but evolution causes us to be humans. It states that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small, inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. Liberalism is a movement in modern Protestantism that emphasizes freedom from tradition and authority, the adjustment of religious beliefs to scientific conceptions, and the development of spiritual capacities. According to the advocates of that movement, the Bible is full of errors and it is the production of efforts of people trying to know God. Humanism holds that there is no difference between man, dog, tree, animal. All have equal rights to exist. All are the production of the first couple who came by mere chance out of chemical soup which came out of rock which came out of nothing, Mother Nature and Father Time. Pantheism advocates that the whole world is God. It is the doctrine that God is the transcendent reality of which the material universe and human beings are only manifestations. It involves a denial of God's personality and expresses a tendency to identify God and nature. Freudianism: man has no mind, soul, or spirit. Man's mind is just his social behavior which is determined by his conscious and subconscious. Freud took from man his mind and reduced him to just a biological, social, and psychological animal. Man became the king of the beasts. By then, the Church lost its authority and the philosophers and scientists became the final authority. Whatever they said became the final word. Then, came the Darwinian theory of evolution, Hegel, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, Nietzsche, God is dead and nihilism, Marx, communism, and Sartre, existentialism. The Enlightenment produced Robespierre, Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, and the list goes on. The Western secularism and atheism reached its zenith in the World War I, 20 million people killed, and in the World War II, 55 million people killed. Western rejection of God and the Bible and the adoption of man-made secular systems under the so-called Enlightenment and secularism brought such untold destruction and misery, making the 20th century the bloodiest century in all of human history. Nietzsche taught that God is dead, which obviates the need to talk about outdated Judeo-Christian notions of God, love, mercy, and grace. He believed that those concepts were the trademark of the weak. The weak races created them to protect themselves from the stronger and superior nations. According to him, the greatest virtue is terror. He calls for the practice of eugenics, that some people have better and stronger genes than others. Following Darwinian theory of natural selection or survival for the fittest, Nietzsche taught that it is preferable to allow weaker races to die off. He said the stronger ones should go ahead and destroy the weaker races, the civilized nations should get rid of the uncivilized nations, and the savages have to die. He proposed that the poor people should be forced to live in unhealthy environments so that nature could hasten their demise. Nietzsche was highly racial and believed that blacks and Jews should be disposed of. Hitler put to practice the Nietzsche's teaching of eugenics and killed 6 million Jews. He was intending to finish the Jewish race first and then on to Africa to destroy the black race. When Hitler heard that his German athletes were defeated in the Olympics by a black American, he protested because his men were made to compete against an animal. Human beings are considered mere animals, bubbles of nothing in the sea of emptiness, and cosmic dust. Man finds himself thrown into a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Man has to choose whatever he likes in this meaningless and absurd world. There are no standards or absolutes. There are no moral standards by which to distill right from wrong. Man decides what is right for him. What if someone thinks that what is right for him is to steal from, or rape, or kill someone else? There are no standards to deter him. The greatest existential philosopher, Sartre, said someone might open his mouth one day and instead of his tongue a lizard might appear. He believed everything is possible in this absurd and meaningless life. Existentialism produced the youth of the 60s and those of today: drugs, sex, alcohol, immorality, nakedness, nudeness, vulgar music and dance, orgies, violence, pornography, bestiality, murders, and many more anomalies. Today, it is not inconceivable that a kid can obtain a gun and proceed to shoot other kids in his school and then take his own life. According to the existential philosophy, the biggest question in life is whether or not to kill oneself. Since there are no standards, the answer to that question is left to everyone's choice. There is no meaning in life. The modern existential man becomes depressed, despaired, and suicidal. For him, God is dead, man is dead, family is dead, child is dead, society is dead, and morality is dead. Science has taken the place of God. Everything without an infinite reference is meaningless. Life is meaningless and absurd. Man is a mass of matter, he doesn't have mind, he doesn't think, he has no will, he doesn't love, but is in essence a selfish animal. Man is a cosmic orphan. He becomes depressed, despaired, pornographic, violent, and aware of his sex drive only. The only impulse that moves man is his sexual drive. Masses of peoples come together in what are called countries and nations, and without moral absolutes to govern them, they treat each other as enemies and destroy each other, World War I and World War II being the result. Today, we witness the birth of a new philosophy in late 20th century called postmodernism. Its vanguards are Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and Jean-François Lyotard. It is said that postmodernism is the Enlightenment turning against itself. It is an attack on the idol of the Enlightenment, reason. They argue that the Enlightenment thinkers invented reason to create ideologies which enabled the white man, the male, and the West to subjugate and dominate the non-white people, the female, and the non-Western countries. Western postmodernist feminists feel their only enemy is the white male who invented reason and began to own them as chattels, wives, and prostitutes. The postmodernist philosophers rejected the validity of human reason, knowledge, truth, and progressive culture. For them, all cultures are relatively true. There is no culture better than other culture. There is no difference between Western culture, Afghani culture, Arab culture, and Zulu culture. Whatever people do in their culture is true to them, and no one has the right to criticize them. If we follow such logic, then we cannot criticize the Islamic practices of female genital mutilation, child marriage, wife beating, polygamy, etc. We cannot condemn the followers of ISIS because all their practices, beheading, stoning, throwing gays from high buildings, burning, caging, flogging, chopping hands, crucifying, invading, robbing, raping and selling female captives, are prescribed by their religion and hence true for them. Reason was the idol of the Enlightenment thinkers, and through it they believed they could find truth without the aid of God. Postmodernism is a rejection of reason, knowledge, and truth. According to postmodernist philosophers, there are nothing out there called absolute truth. Man doesn't possess faculty of knowledge called reason. He has no mind. He is just another irrational animal among other animals. They even rejected the classical Aristotle's definition of man as the rational animal. There is no truth, denial of the existence of any absolute truth or God who caused everything to exist. Man is not capable of knowing anything apart of his immediate experience. Postmodernism is the death of truth. Truth is just a social and cultural construct. Every culture constructs its truth, and whatever the followers of that culture believe to be true is truth for them, and no one has the right to refute their conclusion. Knowledge is a power builder. The philosophers of the Enlightenment used the so-called human reason to create power, Western ideologies, and used it to control and subjugate non-Western countries. Those ideologies are behind white supremacy, subjugation of females by their male counterparts, enslavement of Africans, transatlantic slave trade, and colonization of non-Western countries by the West. The philosophers of postmodernism felt it was their task to deconstruct those false Western ideologies. They believe that they are the saviors of the weak and oppressed.